So I saw DT's video on his Linux and his computing history, so I thought, why don't I just yoink that for myself, because that sounds like a pretty fun video to record. Plus, it's a perfect one to record outside as well, because I don't really need some notes to remember my own past. At least I hope I don't. So, you might know, I don't know if you actually do know, a lot of people don't seem to realize this. I actually started using Linux after I started this channel. I know that seems really weird, this is a very new channel, but I actually started using Linux after I started this channel. I think my first maybe 5 or 10 videos, I was still on Windows. Yeah, I would have been on Windows at the time. So I'm very new to Linux. I've only been using it for a year and a half. I don't know how old the channel is. No, about a year, because I've got about 360 something videos. So a video a day, yeah, that'll be about a year old now. So I've only been using Linux for about a year. That's what can happen if you use Linux as much as I do. You can get to the point that I'm at. I don't think I'm great at it, but I definitely am at the point where I am completely comfortable with it. I know way more than most people do, and this is what you can do if you dedicate yourself to something for an entire year. So anyway, that's not the point of today's video. The point of today's video is talking about how I got here and also where I'm going in the future. So the earliest memory of computing, just using a computer in general, not doing anything productive, just touching a computer. I don't remember what year it was, I don't know how old I was. This is just my absolute earliest memory of even touching a computer. So this would have been at a family friend's place. I don't know who they were. I don't know what the game was. I don't know what the operating system was. I think it was Windows 98. If I was to make my best guess, it would be Windows 98 or Windows ME. But I don't have, I guess, a really strong memory of what exactly it was. And it was some sort of flight simulator. So I know that Microsoft Flight Simulator did exist back then, so it might have been something like that. I don't know exactly what it was, though. It was some sort of really old flight sim. And that is my absolute earliest memory of computing. So I don't remember what year my family got a computer, because both of my parents came from farming families, and we lived in a rural town at the time. So I've mentioned this before. I lived in a town called Glenwood in Queensland. Queensland is a state, not a town. What am I saying? A town in Queensland called Glenwood, and the nearest town that had shops or anything like that was a place called Gympie, which has basically no people. If you know at all where Gympie is, you know how rural I'm talking about. No one even knows where Glenwood is. They know about Gympie, and that's about it. So I don't think we got a computer. We might have had one in Queensland, but I don't think we got one until we came back to South Australia, which would have been around... No, I think until we got into our own place in South Australia. So I think that would have been around 2005, 2006 time, because when we came back, we rented for a while, and then eventually we got our own place. I think that was when we got our first family computer. We might have had one in Queensland that we got rid of, or we had in storage or something, but I don't recall having one back then. Yeah, as I said, we might have, but being in rural Queensland in 2002, 2003, it would have been dial-up anyway, so I wouldn't have really been missing too much. But I do very, very strongly remember that first time using a computer in South Australia. So what I remember is my cousin, who is still a software engineer now, helped us set the computer up, and he told us about this new website that had just started. This new website that everyone was talking about called YouTube. I didn't have any idea what YouTube was at the time. This would have been the year or the year after YouTube started. It was still very, very new. I'd heard no one ever talk about YouTube before, but he was telling me about this awesome new website that exists that everyone's talking about. So I'm like, this sounds cool. I was a young, impressionable kid at the time. I started, looking at YouTube stuff. And I was like, this is actually really cool. This is way cooler than what's on TV. I'm just going to keep watching this. And eventually, I made my way to a game called Runescape, which I would suggest against playing, because that game ruined my childhood. I say ruined, looking back on it, but I did have a lot of fun at the time. So RuneScape is a MMORPG to be specific. And I played that game for about 5 years. So if you played RuneScape, you know about this. I joined the update that the Grand Exchange came out. So that was a pretty major change in the game. That was when it made trading in that game so much easier. So that was the update I joined in. I didn't actually ever get to experience, at least in RuneScape, ever get to experience trading with other players the way that it used to be done. Back when, or after that point, I eventually went and played Empscape and some of the other RuneScape private servers where they didn't have grand exchanges. So I did eventually get to experience, trading with other players in that same way, but I never got to experience it inside of RuneScape. So I played that for 5 years, till about 2012. And then I went and played games like Adventure Quest Worlds and other MMOs like that. But I wasn't really into computing per se. Like, I enjoyed playing computer games, but I didn't really have any interest in what operating system I was running, what hardware I was running, anything like that. I just kind of had the family computer to myself because no one else really wanted to use it. My sister was happy still playing the PS2 at the time, which would have been, 5 years last gen console by the end of that. And then eventually I got myself a PS3. And when I got the PS3, that's when I kind of gave up on computer gaming, at least for a couple of years. So I got that pretty late into the PlayStation 3's life cycle. So around 2012, 2013, a bit after I actually quit playing RuneScape and quit playing like MMOs in general. Honestly, MMOs are really bad for you and you should avoid them. At least I tend to get addicted to them, so I would recommend avoiding them myself at least. So I think it would have been maybe 2014, 2015 until I really got back into, not just back into, really into computers. Now, an old dude just ran by, that's why I stopped for a second, like right in front of me. Anyway, 2014, 2015, when I discovered a little game called Battlefield 3. And that was when I started discovering channels like Linus Tech Tips and whoever else was big at the time, any of the other like big tech channels at the time, and also a lot of the Battlefield 3, I guess, tutorial channels and guide channels and just looking at the game commentary channels. That's what I'm thinking of. I discovered people like Level Cap Gaming was his name at the time, I think. And there was a bunch of other, I don't remember most of them now. There was a bunch of other big Battlefield 3 players who played on PC. And I started looking into, what hardware they're running. And because I started discovering channels like Linus Tech Tips, I started, learning more about computer hardware. And eventually, I think the point I got myself really interested in computers, I would say the current generation of PC hardware would have been the NVIDIA 600 series for GPUs and Intel Sandy Bridge? Ivy Bridge. One of the two of them. I don't remember exactly which generation it was. It was either second or third generation Intel. I don't remember exactly which though, but around that same time. So 600 series NVIDIA. I think the top AMD card was the 7970X? No X. We didn't use X's at the time. The 7970, I think, was the top AMD card. I don't know what their top CPU was because AMD CPUs at the time didn't matter because AMD just wasn't doing anything. They were kind of just surviving. It wasn't until fairly recently that AMD actually started, being actually a competitor to NVIDIA and also to Intel. So at the time, I think, that would have been around, I think I was in grade 11 at the time. So that would have been around when my parents started to split up. So to basically buy my love, I guess would be the best way to describe it, my father ended up paying most of a computer off for me because I wanted a computer. Now, it wasn't super expensive. We're not a wealthy family by any means. It was like a $700 computer. So it was a computer. And I was able to play PC gaming. Now, at the time, my sister already had a PC because she got into PCs a bit earlier than me. Somehow, I don't know how that happened, but she got into PC gaming before me, so she already had hers, and she was running way better hardware than I did, because still at the time, I was sort of only kind of interested in PC gaming. I was still mainly happy doing it on console, and I was getting into anime at the time, so I was watching more anime than I was playing games, so I didn't really need that powerful of a PC, so it was good enough for me. I think my GPU... No, it wouldn't have been... No, it was... 200 series Radeon? No, older than that. It was whatever AMD did just after like the 7970 and all of that stuff. And I also had an AMD CPU. Now, if you know anything about the older like Athlon CPUs or anything like that, you don't buy them. You buy the Intel CPUs. But I kind of just wanted to build the best bang for the buck PC, and $700 Australian is not a $700 US PC. This is like a $400-500 US PC, so you kind of have to get like the bargain bin parts, or you have to like go second hand or something like that. I didn't know this at the time, so I kind of bought new parts, and it was a PC. And from there, all right then, that was loud. From there, I got back into MMOs. I played some Battlefield as well. I think the MMO at the time I was really into was Blade and Soul. So you can probably see what's driving most of my early interest in PCs. It was MMOs. I was super into MMOs at the time. I had a lot of friends who played MMOs. Blade and Soul got me back in touch with some friends I met years ago. So being able to do that was awesome. Even though there wasn't Australian servers and it was really laggy, I was playing like 200 ping all the time, so PvP was impossible. It was still awesome to get back in touch with people that I hadn't spoken to in at least like 4 or 5 years. So I was really happy about that. And that would have been around the time I was also having some of my first programming classes in high school. So grade 10, actually no, this would have been just before I got my PC then. So grade 10, I had my Lego Mindstorms class. Now, I don't know how they got this approved as a class. Basically, you went through if you don't know what Lego Mindstorms is, basically it's like a robotics sort of program, but with Lego, and a very basic sort of programming interface with Scratch. So Scratch it's not Scratch exactly, but it's a Scratch sort of thing. So you drag and drop programming basically. So I was really enjoying this. Everyone got an A because if you completed all the tasks, you got an A. The class got cancelled after 2 years because it was a bad class. So after that, we still had a programming class, but this time we switched over to Java. So in grade 11, I was doing Java. And that was being done with a gaming library called the Greenfoot library. So Greenfoot is a garbage game engine written for Java. It's more there for education rather than being good for programming. And I remember at the time, I think even at the time when I had like 3 months of programming experience, I knew more than the teacher. So I would ask basic questions like, what is an enum? And he couldn't answer the question. So this is like the sort of level of programming that I was originally learning. And then year 12, we had another programming class. Basically, it was the exact same class. Because it was year 12, though, they had to bring in some extra stuff to make it so it would be accepted as a SATAC subject. So SATAC is the marking board for high school in South Australia. So they had to bring in some like sound design stuff just to make it like a media subject rather than a programming subject, because at the time, for whatever reason, a full-on programming subject wouldn't actually be considered like a proper year 12 subject by the SATAC board. I don't know if it's changed now. I presume it would have. It's been 6 years, 5 years. I don't know how old I am. 5 years since that point. So I presume that from that point, SATAC would have learnt what programming is. So hopefully it's actually a proper subject at this point, and doesn't have sound design stuff in it. So at the time, I was actually using a MacBook. So I had my desktop system on Windows, and my school actually gave out MacBooks. So I was using a MacBook since about grade 8. And it was like a 2010 MacBook, which wasn't new at the time I got it, and wasn't new by the time I finished with it. And I used that for most of my high school life, and then I think in year 12 we were given MacBook Pros. So I was very, very happy using Mac. I never had a problem using Mac OS, it was fine. I still don't have a problem with Mac OS. I know a lot of people don't like it. I don't have any issue with it, especially after using it for so long. I kind of always feel slightly nostalgic for using Mac OS. I don't have any interest in going back to it, but if I start up a Mac OS system, it's not like I'm just completely lost using it. I have an idea of what I'm doing, even though a lot of stuff has really changed since then. So I had experienced Windows and I experienced Mac OS at the time, and then I ended up keeping the MacBook Pro into university after my gap year, and I kept using that until the point that laptop ended up dying. So when that laptop died around, I think halfway into my first year of uni, or maybe it was the second year, I ended up buying a new device. I bought an Acer Swift 3, and this is my current laptop. So I used this with Windows for the next year. And then when I got, I think it would have been halfway through the third year of university, I finally, after, having a couple of programming classes where we would run like Linux VMs and try out we were using like Ubuntu and things like that. Eventually I was like, you know what? I've got so many programming classes where I have to use Linux anyway. Why don't I just try this out? Because I had been hearing about Linux for God knows how long. I don't know how long. I don't know when I first discovered it, but being on the internet, you eventually do hear about Linux somehow. But I had always heard Linux was really difficult. It was impossible to install Linux. You're not going to be able to use your software, all of this stuff. And after trying it in some of those programming classes where we would just, set up some sort of dev environment and run like Docker or run, I think we used Git in Linux for some reason. I don't know why. There was no reason we had to. And other things like that. After trying it out those couple of times, I realized it wasn't actually that scary. It was like a lot more command line stuff, but it wasn't scary. And also, around the same time, I started discovering that it wasn't scary inside those classes with VMs. This was a year before I actually switched to Linux. So at the time, my Acer Swift 3 still had Windows on it. I discovered Distrotube. I discovered Luke Smith, Chris Titus, Brian Lunduke, Chris Occhipenti, Infinite Galactic, a bunch of other of these like relatively big Linux channels. And I watched these videos. And Luke was the one I was mainly watching. As you could probably tell from my early content, I had a lot of inspiration from the way that Luke did his videos. I've tried to, bring in more of my own style since then. I feel like I've got myself to a point that it's my own stuff at this point. So I was watching those videos and I was learning about this thing called Arch Linux. Now, I'd always heard about Arch Linux when I heard about things like Ubuntu, but I heard that Arch Linux was even scarier than things like Ubuntu. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to use that. And you watch someone like Luke, you watch someone like me, you watch someone like DT, and you realize it's not that difficult. It's just like a bunch of terminal stuff. And it's keyboard driven. But there's nothing difficult about it. So after, watching those people for a year and a half, I eventually got to the point where I was like, hey, because of these VMs, because it's not actually scary, I'm just going to bite the bullet. I bought a second hard drive because I did want to still dual boot Windows. I bought a second hard drive, I put Linux on it, and then Grub couldn't find my Windows drive, and I didn't know how to fix that, so I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to run Arch Linux as my daily driver. I wanted to do this for a while. I wanted to use Linux for a while, so I'm just going to go full in on it. And I had just started my channel at the time, and I was discovering that a lot of stuff that I was using at the time on my Windows system was already available on Linux. So I was like, why don't I just try that software on Linux? And for things that I can't get replacements for, I think at the time I was using something like Sumatra PDF. I already watched Luke's video on Zathura, so why don't I just try Zathura? Or why don't I finally try Vim? Because Vim is on Windows, but there's not many Windows users who are using Vim. I think at the time I was using VS Code as my editor, so I was like, hey, I'm on Arch Linux anyway, let's just try out Vim as well. And then basically that's the story up to getting to the channel. So yeah, everything else has been pretty much documented along my journey. Everything I've learned on Linux, every piece of software I've come across, everything that I thought was cool, every tutorial that I've wanted to teach, all of that basically led up to the point where I was making this channel. So what about the future then? What does the future hold for me on Linux? What does it hold for me, for computing in general, for programming? Well, at this stage, I don't know. At this stage, I'm very happy on Arch Linux. I'm considering trying Artix at some point when I feel like, reinstalling Arch for some reason. Because Artix, if you haven't seen Luke's videos on it, it's basically Arch minus systemd. there's not really much difference between the two. So I'll probably try it with Run It or something like that. I also want to try some of the BSDs. I've got one of my mods in the Discord constantly harassing me about trying... I think he wants me to try OpenBSD, FreeBSD. I don't know. He'll harass me because I got it wrong. Yeah. I might try out Emacs at some point. That might be fun. But my big project is going to be trying out BSD at some point. I don't want to leave the AUR. I absolutely adore the AUR. So losing that's going to be a problem. But judging by what people are saying about BSD, it's not really that big of a deal. And I know how to like compile files now. It's not really that big of a deal either. I can use a make file, and if I need some sort of build system, I can, you know, make my own build system out of like POSIX script or something like that. Yeah, so maybe in the future I'm going to do some BSD stuff. It's still going to be mainly a Linux channel. I'm not going to stop that. The problem with going full BSD is there's not really that many people on BSD. And the people who know, or the people who use BSD, they know how to use BSD. Linux is more of the entry position into this world of free and open source software. So I think I'm going to stay on Linux, at least in some capacity. I'm not planning to switch anytime soon just because I'm too busy, you know, doing other stuff. But I do want to try BSD, and I think it is going to actually be fun. Now, as for programming, I do programming still in my spare time, and I still have my uni degree where I'm still programming stuff. So that hasn't stopped at this point. But after I finish uni, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know whether I'm going to fully embrace doing this content creation, whether I'm going to still try to go find a dev job. At this stage, I'm going to take a gap year from after I finish uni, so I'm going to go like full on working on the channel. I'm going to start streaming. I'm not going to make more content because I already do 7 videos a day, but streaming is going to be a big one, and maybe putting more effort into finding guests for the podcast and other things like that. So yeah, that pretty much takes us up as much as I want to go over. I don't know what's going to happen more than 2 years from now. That's completely up in the air. I'm obviously going to keep doing computing stuff. I love working with computers, and I have no reason to ever stop. So I'm going to be always doing something with computers, whether that is, you know, streaming, whether that's making videos, whether that's being a code monkey, quitting YouTube and going and being a code monkey. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm always going to be working with computers, and I'm always going to have at least some sort of interest in it. Even if I do end up living in a rural area, which I do want to do at some point, there will always be some part of me that says, I want to work with computers. So this has been a 23-minute video of me vlogging in the middle of nowhere. So my arm is getting a little bit tired. You can probably tell the camera's shaking a little bit. Hopefully it's not too bad. I haven't, you know, I could probably go and like stabilize it, but we'll see if I can work out how to do that in Caden Live. Otherwise, you'll have to deal with a tiny bit of shaky cam. So I think that's pretty much everything for me. I'm going to cut back to when I'm at home to actually go and read out my supporters. And thank you for watching. So I'd like to give a special thank you to my supporters: Joachim, Corbinian, Craig, Nathan, Andrew, Montazar, Joseph, Peter D, Road, Tony, Donald, John, Mikkel, Spagin, Thais, and Zilda. If you want to go support my work, there'll be some links down below to my Subscribestar, my Patreon, all of that stuff, as well as my podcast, which is available on the Tech Over Tea YouTube channel, and also the library channel. The audio version for that is available anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. Also remember to go check out this channel, available on Library, BitTube, and BitChute as well. And remember to go smash the like button and leave me a comment down below. And remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below as well. So I think that is pretty much everything for me, and I'm out.